Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have two members of the House of Delegates with us this morning from the City of Richmond. Delegate Betsy Carr, good to see you.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
And freshman member Don Adams, good to see you.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
So how are things going as a freshman member of the Virginia House of Delegates?
It's going really well. It's a fantastic experience, and it's an honor to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your committee assignments and the district you represent, as well as how the campaign went for you.
I represent Richmond City, Northern Chesterfield, and 2.5 precincts of Henrico. The campaign went really well. We had the highest turnout in the state. Almost 40,000 people voted. It was a really exciting experience. People were really engaged in their state government this year, and that was really exciting. And the third question you asked me?
Committee assignments.
Committee assignments. I am on agriculture and natural resources in the Chesapeake, as well as militia, police, and public safety.
Great. And Delegate Carr, talk to us a little bit about the Martin Luther King Commission, as well as the Women's Monument Commission.
Yes. A privilege to serve on the Martin Luther King Commission, and this year we'll be focusing on Martin Luther King, the commemorative since 1968. And this weekend, in fact, there will be a wonderful concert. The Richmond Symphony is providing a wonderful concert on both Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. Choruses from all the universities from across the state will be performing works by composers from Virginia, so I think it's going to be a fantastic opportunity for folks. In addition, we have you may know they're putting two monuments on Capitol Square, one to Indians and one to women, and the one to women is underway, and we're very excited about that one. A lot of support from folks around the state. This will be the first monument to women in any state in the Union.
Wonderful. There are a lot more women members here, including yourself. Talk to us about what that means from your perspective.
Well, I think that we certainly are rounding out the General Assembly a little more to the degree that we're representing our larger constituency and the population in Virginia. I think it's definitely more representative of who we are. We have not just women, but the diversity of women, first Asian American, first Latinos, we have millennials. We really have a great deal of diversity, and I think that will bring a different, or not maybe different, but augment the perspective of women. And in the way that we communicate and the styles of our communication and problem solving will be, I think, a little more noticeable since there is more representatives that are female.
And Delegate Carr, have you seen any changes since so many more women now are resident here in the House of Delegates?
I think that there's engagement in terms of the policy and the things that we're looking at. It's the conversations that are being had in the subcommittees and so forth. So I think there's definitely kind of more full operative engagement.
A lot more transparency around here this year, at least formally, in terms of some of the rules that the House has adopted. Talk to us about those.
Well, as you probably know, all of the House committee meetings are being recorded and all the sessions. So folks are kind of, that's all under the public eye now in ways that, you know, you didn't see that on the screen before.
Now, what about at the subcommittee level? Are there actually recorded votes now?
Yes, there are.
Tell us a little bit about your background, because I know healthcare is a major concern and passion of yours as a result of your background.
Oh, absolutely. I think you know, the larger concern is just about being healthy in general. I have been in healthcare for about 33 years as a nurse and a nurse practitioner. I've worked in acute care and community. I've worked in administration. So I really see healthcare and the way that it's just a part of being a healthy person. I also am a adjunct faculty at ODU. I teach health policy to doctoral students there. And I've attended 4 Virginia universities, so I have a pretty good perspective on the upper academics. You know, educational parity is a big concern of mine, making sure also that we're looking at issue-based decision-making and not partisan decision-making. I've written 2 bills that sort of changed that lens. One is the Healthy Virginia, and the goal of that bill is to create a commission that is bipartisan and engages stakeholders from the executive branch, private sector, and the legislative branch to really come up with a mission and vision and priorities for how we utilize our resources as a driver for public policy. And then the second, around educational parity, is really looking to you know, bring the conversation away from piecemeal, you know, what's going on, and really about elevating the floor of what is an acceptable quality education, so that, you know, everybody would be okay with this, wherever this is, as being the minimum education standard for their child. And so all children should be looked at as my child, and then we will make right decisions about how we provide resources to children.
I know that you're also dealing with some housing issues this session, Delegate Carr. Talk to us about those, if
Yes,
you will.
on the Housing Commission, we have done several, worked on several bills and legislation from last assembly. So this time we're bringing forward, there's one bill I'm submitting, has to do with giving our local law enforcement tools so that they can help with the criminal blight that we're experiencing in some of the areas along Jefferson Davis Highway and Midlothian. So glad that we're moving that forward. That also has to deal with some other, we have it in for Richmond, but there are a number of other localities that are having the same issue, and they were happy to support what's coming along. Some other things like the fire alarms and just some things that kind of making things consistent across the state. So those are issues. And then we also are putting some things that will help our land banks and community trust in Richmond, some kind of technical things and more just supportive of that legislation that we've had in the past. So we're pleased about that. That will help. All these things will help in housing in our area, as well as other areas around the state.
Now, the holistic approach that Delegate Adams talked about,
Yes,
you're also looking at in terms of our children.
Yes, yes. There, we've become aware of something called the importance of the trauma-informed networks. And I think it's been said by some folks that you know, the effects of adverse childhood experiences are kind of one of the greatest undiagnosed public health challenges that we have. And what this happens is that in some adverse child experiences can have effect in any area or any population, but it's going to be more obvious in some of our areas of high poverty, the depressed areas. And what happens is that will happen, you'll see the effects of that in behavior in elementary school and so forth, but then when people grow up, they'll have the effects of that will land in their bodies, and it will be the high blood pressure or diabetes and so forth. So anyway, it's having an awareness of this and consciousness of it will help us make the right decisions, policy-wise and legislative-wise.
It's a really significant effort because trauma-informed care, we know, is a really, it is a holistic approach to how we teach kids, even adults. You know, we think about just any experience that a child might integrate into themselves and how they interact with the world helps them figure out how are they going to choose behaviors as an adolescent, a young adult. These healthy behaviors or non-healthy behaviors end up being the risks that are associated with the diseases that Delegate Carr is talking about. So, you know, if people make lifestyle choices to, you know, eat things that are particularly not good for them, not real food, drink a lot of sodas, smoke cigarettes, things like that. These are all the risk behaviors that sort of come from this. What you kind of look at the social determinants of health, so like, you know, what and how they're integrating, you know, their life experience and processing that, and how whether they're making good choices to be supporting their whole being. And so those choices as you grow up help you to determine, you know, how you will represent yourself in the world, and that's kind of what leads. We're seeing more and more that link is what is associated with chronic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease. It's really important that we look at this.
So in other words, it's much more important than physical abuse, for example. There's mental abuse, but there's also just seeing the behavior of one's parents, I take it, as well.
Yes, and you know, we get back to that fight or flight thing. So, you know, I think that was made in us genetically and so forth, so that if, you know, if a tiger came running for you, you know, your body got ready to run no matter what you had, you know, you had a hurt knee or whatever. But then when the tiger went away, you would be okay. I mean, your body would go back to normal. But in some areas, the tiger never goes away. And so people are in that constant state of heightened awareness, and so that, you know, they can't operate in other ways. So, you know, and that's things, having worked in some communities in our city, in St. Paul's, we had a partnership with Woodville Elementary School as part of the MICA initiative. Just being aware of the students and the families there that, you know, just have daily constant stress, so drive-by shootings, not enough sleep, having parents who might be incarcerated. All of those things add to the child. And when you get a number of those, then that adds up, and that's going to build up and play out into the body and the mind emotions when a person is grown. So those are the kinds of things we just need to be aware of and kind of make our decisions according to that.
So in spite of all these great whiz-bang technological advances, you and I were talking about the Da Vinci surgery, for example, earlier, those kinds of things. There still needs to be a real focus on holistic solutions and what we can do as individuals in terms of helping ourselves. That will cut costs.
Absolutely.
For example, in healthcare. Tell us why that's so important. Both are important, but they're at opposite ends of the spectrum, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to say it like that. I think you know, we are really lucky and fortunate. We've never been so comfortable, right? And we have a lot of technology to supposedly make us more efficient. And yet we also know that we're seeing increased research that this constant attachment to things like our cell phones and TV and so, you know, social media, it's really actually driving up our stress. And we find out that things like Facebook really are portraying an artificial existence, and most people's lives are more complicated than that. And so, but it does create adverse pressure, the lack of quiet time, the lack of an ability to center, the lack of focus on whole foods, especially in Richmond City, where we have, you know, food deserts, which you wouldn't expect because the proximity of one another. We're very, you know, sort of on top of each other, and at the same time, you know, nutritionally, we have huge deficits in some of our communities. And so, you know, just the quietness, the sleep, we're not focusing or really emphasizing things that used to be part of life, and now they sort of become tangential. Sleep is one of the most important things we can have to treat depression, to treat obesity, to create evenness in moods and increase thinking. So this idea of having uninterrupted, quiet sleep is important, and the city is quite noisy. I live in the Fan. I know that other parts of the city, you know, there's noise. And so, you know, unplugging, getting exercise, eating whole foods, these basics we can't do without, and if we would do more of them, it will drive down the costs. But we have to have safe areas. You know, if we're in communities, I used to work in some of the projects and tangential to the projects, and you know, even though people would want to, for example, live a healthy lifestyle and lose weight, they didn't feel safe to go out and take a walk at certain times. So we need to make sure that our communities are places where we can live a healthy lifestyle if we're going to drive down the cost of healthcare.
So this also, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I want kind of jumping off of what she said about holistic and making the right decisions and so forth there. JLARC has several
That's
recommendations.
a Joint Legislative and Review Committee?
That's correct. That's correct. Kind of the watchdog for making sure that we're kind of heading in the right direction for policy-wise, and that our code and our policies are in concert. I have three pieces of legislation in this time that have to do with the joint JLARC recommendations. One is making sure that we can implement, that there are measures in place that we can implement policies that have to do with the utilization of the aquifer. You know, the aquifer is this major part of the underground water, particularly in the east. What we're talking about in the eastern part of the state, and it's this pure, like pure gold way down, and that, you know, we're running out of it, and so that in the code several years ago they stated that the use of the aquifer, if it became diminished, that we would put human consumption first. So I have one piece of legislation that's following along with that, and looking at making human consumption the priority for the use of the aquifer. And another one has to do with water and water planning, regional water planning. You know, that just makes sense. Maybe there may be a little bit of effort up front for the people for the various locations in a locality to get together, but down the road, this is just good planning to make sure that we have the water is used in the best way. So those are a couple of things that we're moving forward and excited about.
Wonderful. Now, your Healthy Virginia initiative also ties into the debate that has lingered here since the passage of the Affordable Care Act as to whether Virginia should expand Medicaid. I guess we've lost a lot of money, but I take it that's something you would be in support of.
Well, I think it's the responsible thing to do. I think that, you know, we sort of fall between 6th and 8th richest in the entire nation. We have around the 5th highest threshold for Medicaid, so you have to be extremely poor. And yet we have more than 400,000 working Virginians who can't afford any type of health insurance. And we know that health insurance, while it is supposed to be insurance, it is a payer source for getting preventative care. Preventative care drives down the cost of acute care and the utilization of emergency departments. And you know, I think additionally, as having been a hospitalist for 6 years, you know, in Petersburg, where people didn't have access to health care often and preventative care, the cost to treat people that walked in to the acute care situation into the hospital was much higher because they had multiple illnesses that had been not managed for a long time, and so therefore it's more complicated. So it makes sense from a human perspective. You know, I think it's the right moral thing that we make sure people have that sort of safety net of care, but it's also fiscally responsible. Yes, we have left $10.6 billion on the table, but there's still conversations around not taking the 90% match, and the 90% match is important. We could use it. We could build systems where we drive down the cost of care, which I think a lot of us have ideas about that, and we could actually make it work for us.
I guess one of the things that highlights the needs of those 400,000 people is there's an annual event in Wise, Virginia, where people literally sleep overnight and line up for health care. Talk to us about that.
I've never been, but I hope to go in a year soon. But it is people, this is the only health care they get once a year, if they can get in line and wait long. And they're just just distressing stories about people who, you know, they've gone through and they will see a pile of teeth in the little booth. But there are a number of films and videos that have been done about this, and it's something. And people will come here you know, they could have moved across it in another state, and they don't have to do this. So this is something that we should be taking care of.
And the RAM clinic was the remote area medical clinic that
Right.
takes place, and the health wagon down there. You know, part of the reason that works is because you know, nurse practitioners essentially had gone out and sort of initiated this effort, and then recruited other healthcare providers to come down, and so it's really got a holistic approach to how they're delivering care. But it is tragic that we have so many people that have to wait in line just to be seen for once a year care. It's unacceptable. We have to start looking at other efforts where we utilize people in roles where they have education and training to allow them to do that kind of work, so that again we can drive down the costs and provide quality health care. I think that's a good example of how we can do that, and we need to be looking at that. I spoke with Dennis about that particular piece. It costs basically $14 for the supplies. You know, if I know in the programs that I developed for the developmentally disabled, you know, it costs that $14 plus $25 to administer sedation dentistry. So, you know, really we're talking about personnel. There are ways that we can really drastically reduce costs, and we need to be looking at that as part of our solution.
A number of delegates number of physicians and so forth, including our governor, have been and spent time down there.
Absolutely.
Willing to donate their time.
And of course, Delegate Carr, those 400,000 people comprise the working poor. These are people who are
That's right.
actually employed at minimum wage.
That's
Many
right.
of them are on food stamps, yet they can't afford health care.
That's right. That's right.
Now, there's been a continuing discussion on appropriations that you sit on. There's still a lot of pushback. What do you think the chances of success this year may be?
I think I'm kind of optimistic about something being worked out through the budget. We'll just have to wait and see.
Talk to us about some of the initiatives that the governor wants to see occur here. I know he talked about Medicaid expansion. Also, no, they talked about the continuing problem with gun violence, for example. Can you talk to us about that, because that's a public health issue as well?
It really is, and one of the commitments I made to both the gun advocates and the gun safety people is that I would learn as much as possible. In fact, I spent yesterday morning at Colonial Shooting Academy so that I could actually physically understand what it meant when we start talking about, you know, assault weapons or automatic weapons. And I felt it was important to actually know what that power looks like. You know, we have to be able to have conversations, though, that are less driven around whose team you're on and more driven around the fundamental issues. When you talk to people about things like automatic weapons and they're responsible gun owners, one, they know that there are a ton of hoops at the federal level that you have to, you know, complete in order to get something like that. It's not something that you can casually purchase. And yet, if you talk to a responsible gun owner about bump stocks, for example, you know, basically that's just a pathway to creating an automatic weapon. So it circumvents the process. And I think when you just talk to people apolitically, on the face of it, it's wrong. We shouldn't allow that. You get into the political environment and it becomes sort of a partisan issue, and that's really unfortunate, and it's not doing our constituency any good. So we have to look at, so what are the facts, what does the data show, you know, and do the right thing, because these are, you know, guns, like any other powerful machine, are things that we should respect and we should be sensible around.
Of course, that bipartisan effort with you and Delegate Chris Peace, some of that trauma, I'm sure that these children are experiencing, relates to gun violence.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
You and he are partners in that respect,
That's
but
right.
I don't think you're partners in terms of gun ownership in the Second Amendment.
That's right. You know, and I will have most of my constituents are very concerned about gun safety in the communities, and some of my legislation has reflected that. On the other hand, I do have people that are concerned about their Second Amendment rights. The people in the communities will say, why does somebody need to have, you know, extra magazines that go up to more than 15? Why do we need to have bump stocks? You know, and so I think that that's as Dawn has pointed out, that becomes a political debate when it doesn't need to be or it shouldn't be in order to have our safe communities.
Of course, another issue that has been highlighted once again as a result of the two anomalies in terms of the election relates to voting rights. We had the situation in Hampton Roads where literally a name picked out of a hat determined that election. We had the situation in Fredericksburg and Stafford County where people were given the wrong ballots because they were in different precincts. How's the legislature dealing with that, if you know?
Well, I believe there are several bills in to sort of look at ways that we might make this process better. I know that in general, though, you know, actually having a gun conversation and a voting conversation is actually a good. They're good to put together. They're both constitutionally protected, and we sort of need to look at. We could actually look at how we make policy for both of those things together. We might make better policy because really we should be looking at what makes things accessible, but at the same time transparent, safe, and at the same time not onerous. And so, you know, I think, like, I know I put in a bill in response to this free, you know, we have a voter photo ID, but it should be free, and it is free, but it's very difficult to see that. I did put in a bill, and it was funded, and you know, unfortunately, it was killed in subcommittee, but fortunately, the DMV commissioner and the directors there have now agreed to actually put it on the DMV website, that it's very clear that there's a free photo ID, and link it to the State Board of Elections website application. That is a level of transparency that we hadn't had before, even though it was in code. And next year, the license plate, which is I Have a Dream, will go back in to fund so that we can have 77 potential additional locales that we can get our free voter ID cards.
And the JLARC is studying, that's one of the studies they're undertaking at this point, the Department of Elections. So I think, again, we'll have some good policy decision opportunities coming out of that.
What about the need for a bipartisan redistricting commission?
Yes, I think that would be, you know, you get back into the traditional arguments about that, oh, it can't be away from the political process. I've put in something every a term that I've had, just about every year also, about nonpartisan redistricting based on the Iowa one, which is a nonpartisan group of retired judges. Always constraints about that. And, you know, I think it's a perennial argument, and I also think that a number of people are aware of it now, and what a difference it makes. If the issues, if the areas are gerrymandered, and so you have areas that are so, let's say, conservative and so progressive, what happens is that the main election happens in the primary. And so then what happens when people come to work together to get things done, there's more polarization because they are reflecting the kind of extremes of the, whereas if the issues are more together, then you know, you have to kind of weigh things and balance things, and there's more movement toward the center.
And I have a bill that's coming up tomorrow. It's a referendum exactly on this issue that puts that to the people. You know, is this something that we should be doing? And so hopefully we'll get more information about the people's will.
Great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Delegate Don Adams, Delegate Betsy Carr. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.